Welcome to episode 63 of the How to Japanese podcast. I'm Daniel Morales from howtojapanese.com, and it's April 2025. We made it! Otsukaresama deshita. This month, I've got some guidance on finding new Japanese expressions, a look at a new Murakami novella, and some recommendations for Kyoto. Last month was Osaka, and this month I was in Kyoto with a friend who was in town, and I thought, why not put up some recommendations for Kyoto on the blog? So I have those up there. But first, I have a small announcement that may interest some listeners. I've expanded the volunteering that I'm doing with US JETA. That's the US Jet Alumni Association. I've been running my Japanese reading group through the Jet Alumni Association since 2014, initially through the Chicago chapter where I was living, and then later through US JETA during the pandemic, once online virtual meetings became kind of the norm. I tried to go virtual during my time in Chicago when a lot of the members moved away and had very limited success. But during the pandemic, I think things finally kind of gelled and that's kind of gone nicely. We've been doing that for, I think, 4 or 5 years now, which is kind of crazy. And the US JETA leadership wanted to expand their Japanese language offerings a little bit. So they got in touch with me, and I was brainstorming with Chris Lindsay, who's the developer behind the app Nihongo, which I can recommend. He's also been a sponsor of the reading group, and he's got some really interesting ideas about Japanese study that he's incorporated into his app, which is a dictionary app and also a lessons app. And together we came up with this idea of Japanese coaching. I initially wanted to call it office hours, and my idea was to hang out on a Zoom call, let people drop in and out, and just ask questions about studying Japanese. But as we were talking, the word coaching kind of came out in the conversation, and we honed in on that, and that really seemed to fit what we were trying to do. And it does seem like it was a catchy way to put it, Japanese coaching. We had our first session earlier this month, and it filled up in less than 24 hours. We're planning to offer these sessions quarterly, and I think they're lightweight enough lightweight in terms of the amount of prep that both Chris and I have to do, that we can basically offer them indefinitely. So if you're interested, please look out for that. I'll try to put a link there, but US JETA will also have the information, and go ahead and get on the wait list if the next session's full, and they'll let you know when the next session will be. Chris and I talked a little bit about our experiences in that first session and also what's worked for us in terms of studying, but we spent most of it just kind of listening to what people wanted to learn about, what they're doing, what challenges they're facing, what kind of help they need. And then we talked about what might work for them, tried to solve problems that they're having, things like that. Regular readers will probably be familiar with a lot of the advice that I provided. I talked about trying to balance input and output, being mindful about your interests and letting those naturally guide your study rather than forcing yourself in one direction or studying something that you think you should study. And then also about staying the course and setting a pace. So it was part kind of motivational and part very specific recommendations. We talked about using TVer to watch dramas, something that you can do in Japan for free. And even if you're in the US, you can access it with a VPN, which is what I was doing when I was living in Chicago. You can find reading material at tadoku.org. It's a good strategy to learn how to read that I wish I had been aware of when I was just a beginning and intermediate student. And then we also talked about specific strategies for the JLPT, specific books that you can buy, and then also how to prep for the tests and strategies for kind of giving yourself time to review before you go into the test. One of the questions we got from a couple people is, how do you improve your speaking skills? And I think this comes in particular, how do you improve your speaking skills in isolation if you're living in the US, for example, if you're not in Japan? This is also, I think, tied together with the idea, how do you find and learn authentic Japanese phrases without a kind of native speaker to confirm them for you, without a teacher of some kind? The ultimate goal is to get to a point where you feel more or less comfortable with your level of Japanese so that you feel comfortable creating natural new phrases. And these will be kind of conglomerations of previous phrases that you've used that you naturally now know how to put into some new expression. And you do this with your native language all the time. You're creating new permutations of language that are unique, that you've never heard before, but are very natural. And you're building on past patterns, things that you know work, phrases and words that are familiar. And the same is true for Japanese. Although with a non-native language, every now and then you start to kind of doubt yourself maybe, and you probably need to check whether more complex phrases are actually able to be used in the way that you think they are. But at the same time, you've got to build the confidence to just try them out and then get corrected by somebody if you use them wrong. And for expressions that are actually brand new, things that you've never used before that you're truly encountering for the first time, I've written about different ways to approach figuring out how to use them without a teacher in isolation a number of times over the years. In February 2021, I mentioned this massive industry online that's dedicated to how to use Japanese, often in business situations, but sometimes not always. Sometimes it's just regular phrases. These are websites like Mayonnaise, Tap-Biz, Eigobu, Goiryoku, and even Forbes Japan is getting on this. And actually, as a bit of foreshadowing, next month I wrote about a phrase that I found explained in great detail in a Forbes Japan article, which makes me think that there's money to be made in this kind of writing online. They're getting lots of clicks or something like that. That seems to be the only explanation for why there's this massive amount of these sites online. But you can use them for your advantage, I think. And I wrote about how to do so in an April 2018 Japan Times article, specifically about keigo in this case. If you find a phrase that you need to know more about or how to use, you can just tack keigo onto a search, and that search will generally turn up a lot of these articles about how to use something in a business situation. And I wrote specifically about how I was able to use these sites to write an expression for my job at the time. I don't remember exactly what the situation was at work, but I had to write to somebody about basically, please use this information carefully, like don't disclose it or something like that. And the phrase that I came up with was genkaku na kanri no motoご利用いただきますようお願いいたします. I'll say that one more time. 厳格な管理のもとご利用いただきますようお願いいたします. So started at the end. お願いいたします. I'm making this request of you in a polite way, and I'm doing that. いただきますようお願いいたします. いただきますようお願いいたします. So do something in such a way that ご利用いただきますよ. Use something. I would like you to use something in such a way that, and then that first part is 厳格な管理のもと, which is the strictest handling, the strictest management. So please use this with the strictest handling. That's kind of a very literal translation, but remember, we're always more interested in what the Japanese is doing rather than making a good translation. So clearly this is a written Japanese phrase. There's a lot of things, I think, that kind of make it that way. It's just very katai in general, very formal, maybe not one that you need to kind of come up with on the spot. So if you're writing an email like this, you'd have a minute to prepare yourself like I did and kind of construct it. That one in particular, I was able to find example phrases for the first half of that, genkaku na kanri no moto, and then the second half, ご利用いただきますようお願いいたします. And then put those together in a way that felt like it was natural, even though I wasn't able to find any specific examples of that sentence on its own. For something more general that's not maybe keigo, for example, I wrote about shūshoku katsudo, job hunting activities back in June 2022. And I mentioned another strategy, which is instead of using keigo on your search, you can attach the word reibun. Reibun. Re being example. Re is a word for example. It's also the kanji that gets used for tatoeba. And then bun being the word for sentence. So, reibun. And I thought it'd be helpful or maybe interesting to go over an example of exactly my process in these cases. How would I take a word that I've never used before, that I don't know what it means, and find sentences that feel within my wheelhouse, feel comfortable within my current level of Japanese to be able to use. So this is how I might nail down some example sentences that I can then add to my active Japanese. This is a little bit different from creating something unique, right, that I just did in that sentence above, from patterns you already know, or searching to find new patterns. This is just kind of finding a new pattern that you've never encountered, figuring out how to use it, and finding something that's comfortable to use within your wheelhouse that you can imagine using. So to give a quick overview, my solution generally goes through the following steps. 1, I search for the word with reibun, and that hopefully turns up some of these Japanese pages that I mentioned, which have examples and explanations of how it gets used. I think the key here is to avoid sites that are geared for non-native speakers. Not that they're all bad, but I do feel like here you can err on the side of trusting the Japanese native speakers. What we're looking for is Japanese, explaining Japanese in Japanese for Japanese. The second step is to read these websites, find a few phrases, see if any of them feel comfortable or useful. Not everyone is going to be immediately helpful, or even, to be honest, immediately authentic and natural. I feel like some of them might be a little bit forced every now and then on these websites. Who knows? But you can find 1 or 2, I think, that you can imagine being helpful. Write those down. Some of those will work. And then the best next step after that, step 3, is to check those against other spots online to see, is this being used on social media? Is this being used on other websites? If you're seeing it out in the wild in actual Japanese content, I think that's a good sign. If it's only on these explanatory websites, like the ones I mentioned, then you want to confirm it against some other spots. So if you're just seeing it in some of these Japanese explanations of Japanese, then you might want to use it with more caution. In terms of social media, I think one of the best places to check is still, unfortunately, twitter.com. There's just a lot of Japanese people still using it, despite the fact that it's filled with not the best people at the moment, and that the service has really declined, I think. But I do feel like occasionally checking phrases against it to see how they're being used is a reasonable enough moderate use of the site. So what pattern did I look at this month? The title of the newsletter this month is Reibun, basically, because that's the one I wanted to use to introduce it. But the pattern that I looked for, the actual one that was new to me, is moro moro. Moro moro. And I'm willing to bet it's new for you. It does feel like it's not used all that frequently, so this isn't one that you'll want to incorporate into your everyday vocabulary. But I do think it's useful, and I do think you can also use it to potentially add humor, and I'll go over that. So I heard this word at work this week, and I kind of noted it down. Okay, go figure out what this means, because I couldn't immediately parse it, and kind of filed it away to look into later. And so when I sat down to write the newsletter, I was like, might as well write about that, because it was top of mind and I had never used it before. I did recognize the kanji. The kanji for moro moro. Moro moro is repeated, so it's got the one kanji with that repeated marker, and it gets used in the kanji for shokoku. Shokoku, koku being country, and I learned that word in college, I think, and it just stuck with me for whatever reason, or college or somewhere. I can't remember where, to be honest. Maybe it was a JLPT word. But it means just various countries. So I had this sense that moro moro could potentially mean various, but I had no idea how to use it, and needed to kind of confirm that. Google search turns up a bunch of different articles with it, which I'll link the one that I relied on the most, and it has this helpful definition. もろもろとは多くのもの、すべてのもの、さまざまなもの、多くの人などという意味を表します。Let me read that last part again. などという意味を表します。I'll read the whole thing one more time. もろもろとは多くのもの、すべてのもの、さまざまなもの、多くの人などという意味を表します。And that in English means, moro means things like lots of things, all of things, various things, lots of people, and other things. So I was more or less right. But this only takes it so far. Is this various what? This various like cars, various business transactions. Is that how you use it? Can you just attach it like that? We need to know a little bit more. The article goes on to explain 多く、たくさん、さまざまなどといった表現よりも固めの印象を与える言葉であり、日常における会話よりも文章やビジネスシーンなどで多く使われる傾向にあります。I'll read that one more time. 多く、たくさん、さまざまなどといった表現よりも固めの印象を与える言葉であり、日常における会話よりも文章やビジネスシーンなどで多く使われる傾向にあります。In English, that is, moro is more formal than expressions like 多く、たくさん, and さまざま. So it tends to be used more often in written language and in the workplace than it does in daily conversation. So this helps us get a little bit closer. We know that it can potentially be used in place of words like 多く or たくさん or さまざま. And those, I think, should be relatively familiar. So it might just be a more katai synonym for those words, I think. And that's a good way to use it. The article then goes on to categorize the usages into things like お礼, thanks, 連絡, communication, 相談, consultation, 承認, confirmation, and 依頼, requests. This is also useful, but now we need to see it in action. We need an actual sentence that's going to give us a very more visceral sense of how it gets used. And there are two sentences from the article that I think really summarizes how it can be used. The first is this one. お菓子や洋服など、もろもろのものをいただきましてありがとうございます。お菓子やお洋服など、もろもろのものをいただきましてありがとうございます。In English, that is, thank you for the snacks and clothes and other various items. So here you can say もろもろのもの. もろもろのもの. So it's literally being used to modify mono here with the no in between it. もろもろのもの. Various things, a range of different items. And the person using this expression gives two examples of those, which is the お菓子やお洋服など. So there were these two, and then など, もろもろのもの. And it's expressing the thanks for all these various items. And you can see, yeah, たくさんのもの, 多くのもの. Those would be easy ways you could say, but もろもろmaybe slightly more katai. Might be a nice way you could say something like that, say thank you in a business email or something like that. Here's another sentence that I think expresses the other usage case. ご相談いただいた件について、もろもろ承知いたしました。ご相談いただいた件について、もろもろ承知いたしました。On the topics we consulted about, I have understood all of them. And you'll have to excuse the overly literal English translation here. I think it's helpful to see exactly what the Japanese is doing. And here, you can hear that it's not attaching to whatever it's attaching to with a no, right? So we had moro moro no mono, which is a clear signal that it's an adjective form there attaching to another noun. Here, moro moro shouchi itashimashita. Moromoro shochi itashimashita. It's attaching just directly to that verb as an adverb. And so shochi is a great Japanese expression that my business teacher taught me when I took a week of Japanese refresher courses just before starting transferring from my job at the Japanese consulate to the nonprofit where I was working. And she said, whenever you want to say wakarimashita or ryoukai desu or something like that, just say shochi shimashita. And that, I think, is probably one of the most important Japanese lessons I ever learned. But here, again, moromoro shochi itashimashita is a great way to express that you've understood all the different things that have been discussed or communicated about in a previous communication. So now we have these two sentences. I think, it's nice we have it nailed down. You can use it as an adjective to modify other nouns, as an adverb to modify how something is being done. Various things were received. In this case, understanding was performed for several things. And now that we have now that I had this grasp of this expression, I went over to Twitter to check online to see what kind of things people were saying. And we know that it's a somewhat katai phrase, but people do seem to be using it online. And I think it's potentially somewhat ironically, somewhat humorously, sometimes even it's moro. It's just kind of a nice sounding phrase. And so you see it kind of put out there on social media sometimes in a lot of different situations. So kind of nice. I did find at least one sincere usage that I found particularly helpful. And I put a screenshot of this in the newsletter. One of the users I found seems to be tweeting about some kind of transportation situation, some kind of adjustment to buses or something, I don't know if it was a mishap exactly, but something was changed and the people running the buses made adjustments or something, but it all worked out in the end. So the person tweeted, Moro moro no gochousei arigatou gozaimasu. Moro moro no gochousei arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you for all of the adjustments. And this is a phrase that I could totally see myself using at work, both with people inside the company or someone outside the company. In both cases, I'm often reliant on others for support. So I can see a situation in which someone did various things or updated something or slightly adjusted the way that they were doing a certain kind of work or something on my request. And I could thank them by saying, Moro moro no gochousei arigatou gozaimasu. And note that I think in all these cases, it's used in a pretty positive light. Moro is attaching to things that are mostly positive. These adjustments were a benefit and appreciated. The person in the previous example received lots of different things. The moro of understanding is something where I think it's largely a positive thing that all these things are understood. The article does note that it should be avoided in apologies, in which case moro might kind of unintentionally gloss over things that someone's apologizing for, in which case it might seem like you're not fully recognizing them, and you might want to note them more specifically so it's clear that you're doing the kind of requisite hansei that is required to truly be sorry, I think, in Japanese. That's really about all I have this month. I wanted to kind of go through how I might approach a new phrase, what resources you have out there if you're out there on your own studying Japanese. If you don't have a teacher, you can check examples against, and then you're gonna have to take a leap of faith at times and just kind of use some of these phrases. And if they get an awkward look or you get a reply of misunderstanding, that's when you can kind of go back to the drawing board or hope that somebody corrects you or something like that. But yeah, a lot of it is just kind of going like that on your own and seeing how things turn out. Next, I wanted to mention the Murakami novella. It's actually a sequel to a short story he published in June 2024 in the magazine Shincho. And that story was originally presented at a reading in March 2024 with Kawakami Mieko. So this comes a year after, more or less a year after that story. This is the May 2025 issue of Shincho, which came out this month, earlier in April. That story called Kaho last year was published in the New Yorker in July of 2024. I'll put the link to that in the newsletter. It's about a woman named Kaho, the titular character, who's an illustrator who goes out on a date with a man who insults women on every date he goes out with them to see what their reaction is. He tells them they're the ugliest women that he's ever seen to kind of see what their reaction is like. And so Kaho is kind of like a little bit unfazed by this, is kind of like weirded out, but like more or less unfazed, but surprised to hear that he wants a second date. And when she does meet with him out of kind of curiosity, she learns why he does what he does and then kind of rejects him for that. So the novella is a sequel to that story, and it's titled Musashi Sakai no Arikui. And Arikui is exactly what it sounds like. Ari being ants and kui being ant-eaters. The line is a callback to that short story. The man she goes on a date with seems to be able to read her thoughts. And at one point, Murakami writes, and this is the official translation, there was no mistake here. He could read her thoughts, like an anteater licking an anthill clean with its long, thin tongue. The anteaters in this news story appear in Kaho's dreams and warn her to move from Adachi-ku in kind of northeastern Tokyo to Musashi Sakai in western Tokyo to get away from a loud motorcycle sound. The motorcycle here is another callback to that short story. The man who insulted her invited her to ride along in his motorcycle on the second date, and she rejects this offer. I'm still working my way through the novella, just a few pages every day. I got a little bit backed up with some other stuff, so I've missed a couple days, but we'll see where it goes. It's like okay so far. It's a bit contrived, but it has several words and phrases that I've written about in the newsletter recently, so I thought I'd go over those as a kind of review. And in the very first paragraph, we get a variant of ato ni natte wakatta koto. Ato ni natte wakatta koto, which I wrote about as a way to say something you realize later. And I'll read this paragraph out. Kaho o Musashi Sakai no chi ni michibita no wa ippiki no arikui datta. 正直に言えば、アリクイの夫婦ということになるが、それが分かったのは後になってからだ。I'll read that one more time. 家宝を武蔵境の地に導いたのは一匹のアリクイだった。正直に言えば、アリクイの夫婦ということになるが、それが分かったのは後になってからだ。And the English is, an anteater guided Kaho to Musashi Sakai. To be more accurate, it ended up being a married couple of anteaters, but that's something she realized later. So listen to that last part one more time. それが分かったのは後になってからだ。それが分かったのは後になってからだ。You can flip that around like I looked at it in the newsletter, like Murakami wrote that in his memoir, 後になって分かりましたが, or you can use it here, right? それが分かったのは, he's using it to emphasize, それが分かったのは, she realized that when, later, 後になってからだ. The kara here is indicating the moment from which or after which she realized it. It's not kind of the kara of because or causality, explaining a reason. This is a great little phrase. I think another example of how flexible it can be if you kind of get comfortable shifting it around the gas and was, and you can use it to say a lot of different things in a lot of different kind of manners. It's a pretty interesting phrase. Another phrase that I haven't really written about yet, but relates to Harbo Wonderland and how to translate the word kokoro. In the original Birnbaum translation, he translates kokoro as mind. These are the kokoro of the people in the town where the narrator in the even section chapters of the book are living. The people of this town gradually give up their minds, or maybe not so gradually, as their shadows die generally within the first season of being separated from their bodies. And in Rubin's new translation, he uses heart instead, which I think is a defensible choice. It's interesting for sure. But mind is also nice. And I think the use of kokoro in this story too shows a reason why it might even be natural that way. This is the sentence. このアリクイは人の心が読めるのだとカホは思った。このアリクイは人の心が読めるのだとカホは思った。This anteater seems to be able to read people's minds, Kaho thought. So here, 心が読める, that phrase, 心が読める, you could translate that as heart, obviously, but reading someone's mind is such a natural phrase in English that it kind of makes sense to translate that way. And kokoro is somewhere kind of in between, heart and mind. And like kokoro no byoki is something that you hear a lot. And that doesn't mean heart disease. That means some kind of like mental health situation. So another reason why translation is hard. But thought that was interesting. I'm still working my way through this new translation of Horrible Wonderland and Into the World, intending to write and podcast something about that. So stay tuned for that. That's hopefully coming soon. And the last sentence I wanted to highlight was one that uses suji from last month that I wrote about. And here is that sentence. 私の説明がまずくて、おかげで話の筋が余計にわかりにくくなってしまったみたいですね。私の説明がまずくて、おかげで話の筋が余計にわかりにくくなってしまったみたいですね。It seems my explanation was poor, so the point of the story has become needlessly complicated / difficult to understand. Here, suji, which I went over last month, which means tendon, can also mean long, kind of narrow thing. It means avenue in Osaka. Is used to mean the point or the summary of something. And here, this is, I believe, the anteater trying to explain something or other. And this explanation not being very good has made the point of the story more complicated, difficult to understand than maybe would otherwise be the case. So I think this is, one of the greatest parts of studying languages is that as you discover words and encounter them and dig into them and then research them, you start to see them more often and then they make more sense. So it's this kind of virtuous cycle of language study that you need to kind of force yourself to get into by learning things and then exposing yourself to more content like immediately and seeing what else you can find, and you'll inevitably run into the things that you do study. And finally, this month, I wanted to give a few more tourist recommendations. I had a lot of fun doing that for Osaka last month, and I don't have many for Kyoto, but I do have a few that I think are really, really good recommendations. So I wanted to do those real quick. And the first is that Sanjusan Gendo is kind of criminally underrated and much, much, much less crowded than most of the other sites in the city, especially the super popular ones. I also think it's by far the most impressive temple in the city. And it's not kind of like a temple in the same sense as the other main temples, Fushimi Inari, which I guess that's a shrine, but Kiyomizu, Kinkakuji, places like that. It's not this complex that you're going to see a building. It is a temple. It's Rengeoin is the official name, and it was part of this imperial complex. But the highlight is the main hall, which is really the kind of only building there on the site. It has 1001 statues of the Buddha Kannon. And you kind of go in through this entrance. It kind of threads you through the back of the temple, and you turn around this corner, and like this long, hundreds of meter long stretch comes into view, and it's kind of dimly lit, and there's 1,000 of these cannon statues, and it's just incredible. The sheer volume, it's not like huge like the Daibutsu in Kamakura or Nara, but just the sheer filling of space with all these statues is incredible. And then they have these 28 guardian statues that are along the front line, and they are really just excellent. They look so realistic that they might kind of jump down off their platforms. And then when you get halfway to the middle of this long, long hallway, there's a large cannon, and it's just incredible too. Again, it's not quite as massive as the Daibutsu, but it's worth seeing. It's also a kind of forced exercise in mindfulness because you can't take any photographs. So there's nothing to really take you away from just being present with all these statues. Just incredible. The first time I went completely by accident. It's right across from the National Museum. And I guess I was heading there. And to be honest, I don't really remember. I was there with my family, showing my family around Kyoto in 2003, the very first time I went to Kyoto on my own. And we must have we were staying near Kyoto Station, and we must have gotten on a bus and go to the National Museum and said, "Hey, there's this temple right there. Let's go check it out." And I must have seen a little bit about it. This was, before the smartphone days. So we had really no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and we're just blown away. A couple notes that I know from March is that I went 2 days in a row actually in March. I went with friends one day and then family the next day. And the second day I went happened to be Girls' Day, the Girls' Day holiday, and entrance was free. It was the most crowded I've ever seen it, but it was still pretty manageable. They were serving udon and other food in the courtyard and within the temple. Within the temple, like toward the end, you go down this long hall, and when you get to the very end, you're about to kind of turn the corner to leave, to go to the back of the hall, and then eventually make your way to the exit. A step scaffold had been erected near the far end, and it enabled you to get up on a higher level, and as you turn the corner, you look out over all the statues. It was just amazing. Really one of my favorite visits there. So if you can get there on Girls' Day, that would be great. They also have an archery festival that I guess it's open to the public, but women compete in this archery contest, and they dress up in these amazing kimono. And that's in January at some point. So the Girls' Day was very impressive. I'm sure the archery competition would also be great. Worth looking into more information if that's something you're interested in. But I think those 2 days would be very, very crowded. Most other days, even the weekends, are very, very manageable at Sanjusan Gendo. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I think Kiyomizu-dera is completely overrun with tourists right now, but still is worth a visit if you can make it. The temple has such a great view of the city. The structure itself is so massive and situated up on the hill with the terracing and the kind of structure underneath the temple, the woodworking that goes into keeping it up there, that even if you kind of hate the crowds, it's worth checking out. It's awesome. The best time to visit is late November, when they stay open later at night and illuminate the fall foliage. They get great orange leaves up there. And I went my first 2 years in Osaka, kind of by coincidence, on the same day of the year in November, that I skipped this past year, and I kind of regret doing that. I didn't get to go check it out. I was just kind of worn out a little bit. If you're going to go do that, I recommend, if at all possible, running up there on a weekday after work, because it's so packed, and I imagine the weekends are just a total mob scene. Even on the weekdays, it took about 15 minutes to kind of get to the edge of the platform where you can get the best views of the leaves and take the best pictures. But really great. I'll put a photo of that on the blog. Taxis are really useful in Kyoto. The bus situation is pretty dire right now. They're all super, super crowded. And in one case, I got on a bus. We managed to fit right at Sanjusan Gendo. We're thinking about getting off at Kiyomizu-dera, but everyone but us, almost literally, got off at Kiyomizu-dera. And I was like, okay, that's a sign to just kind of stay on and keep going. And so we went to Yasaka Shrine instead, and then walked up towards Kawaramachi. I also think that Nishiki Market is, unfortunately, it's done, man. I think is, I think this always happens with central markets. They really are one of the first things to get destroyed by tourism. 20 years ago, Nishiki was at times, I think, felt still somewhat like a greengrocer that you still see at some shotengai. But now there's just so much plastic food along that stretch, and it's worth walking down it if you're going to be in that area anyway. But I'm not sure if it's the same highlight that it used to be. If you're looking for, I think, a more authentic shotengai experience, there are others to go check out. One that I always think of here in Osaka is Kuromon Market, which is down near Namba. That one still feels like there's actual people selling like seafood and things like that. But even Kuromon is somewhat touristy these days, I would say. It reminds me, I have to mention it, the French Market in New Orleans, because that's where I grew up. And the French Market really is like a very cool American shotengai. It's a long covered shopping arcade down in the French Quarter that mostly sold produce when it was literally a market, for hundreds of years. And by the time I was a kid growing up in the 1980s, there were still a handful of produce vendors. I remember the smell more than anything, to be honest, of that market. You go there and it's got these amazing like fruit and vegetable smells that you get in markets like that. And but even then, the rest of the market had been taken up by flea market sales and some artisans. And I remember used book people selling used books, but we'd still get, like, in the fall every year, for example, they'd get all the pumpkins and people would buy pumpkins there. But now it's all the produce is gone. It's kind of been replaced by people selling trinkets and a few generic artists. Maybe I've even seen people kind of hawking their self-published novels down there, which I think you have to admire that hustle. But that just reminded me of Nishiki Market, and I had to mention it. So I think Nishiki Market is unfortunately kind of in that vein. And there's still some great stuff, I think, in the side streets in that neighborhood. And the other shotengai in that area are also pretty excellent, although, they're not like maybe quite as brand heavy as the ones in Namba, I would say, but there's still a lot of sales like that. I've got two museum thoughts for Kyoto. One is the Kanji Museum. It's only okay. I went last year during Golden Week. It's near Gion, so if you're in that area and are a Japanese maniac, really interested in kanji, then that might be worth checking out. But the exhibits are all in Japanese, and it feels a bit oriented towards like school field trips and things like that. On the second floor, they will grade kanji kente practice problems, which is kind of cool. So you can test your skill set against different levels of the kanji kente, which is the kanji exam that kids take here. The manga museum is better than the kanji museum, maybe, but still not, I would say it's not superlative. I would say only go if you're really, really into manga. It's in this old school building, kind of slightly northwest from Kawaramachi. And the fact that it's in an old school building makes it feel very like kind of disjointed because it's all kind of meandering a little bit. They do seem to have some cool rotating exhibits. And I came away with a couple interesting authors that I wanted to check out. The gift shop also was only okay from what I remember. If you're looking to actually buy manga, though, I would really recommend just going to a nice book off instead, though. And then one hiking recommendation, which is Hiezan. Hiezan is this mountain that's right on the edge of Kyoto and Shiga prefectures. You can walk to the trail from Shugakuin Station on the Eizan line. If you go to Demachi Yanagi at the end of the Keihan line, you can catch the Eizan line from there, just a couple stops. And from there, it's a kind of like maybe like 20-minute walk to the trail and then 2 to 3 hour hike. I think altogether probably 2 to 3 hours, depending on how fast you're moving. Maybe err on the side of 3 hours if you're planning. And it's a hike, but it's not overly strenuous. It's a good workout, but you're not going to like be out of breath by the time you get to the top by any means. And when you get to the top, there's a great view of Lake Biwa at the Garden Museum Hiei, it's called. and you can chill out there. There's a couple cafes. Depending on the time of year, they've got really nice flowers. And then you have lots of options to get back down. You can obviously hike back down the way you came. You could take the cable car down. You can also take the cable car up from the Kyoto side. There's also, you could hike down the Shiga side. That's not something I've done yet, but you could very easily do that. And that might be a fun thing to do. And you get cool views of the lake. That's kind of something I'd like to do at some point, but I'm always tempted by the bus at the top near the garden Museum Hiei. There's a bus that runs directly down to Kawaramachi, which seems like a miracle because like you can go from being on the top of this mountain to being back in central Kyoto, and then on the Hankyu line back to Osaka in like maybe less than an hour or so. The one thing I'd be careful about is that the bus drops by Enryakuji. So if you can, try and get in line early for the bus so you can get a seat and sit down the whole way to Kyoto if you're recovering. Because a lot of people will get on at Enryakuji, which I also haven't checked out. It's on my list of things to do. It seems like a really cool temple up there. I think it's, I don't know the background of it offhand, but it is a relatively important temple from what I can remember. And those are my Kyoto recommendations. I've seen a lot of Kyoto, obviously, before other stuff before that, but in the last couple of years, I haven't seen too much new other than Hiezan, and I've seen one other temple near Hiezan, but I wouldn't quite recommend going out of my way to see it. And so I don't think there's anything else that I can recommend immediately. And I don't know enough about how things have changed at Fushimi Inari or Kinkakuji or things like that. The Kinkakuji, Ryoanji, Ninnaji, that kind of area of town up in the northwest was always kind of worth a visit when I was traveling previously, but I don't know how those have been affected by the recent tourist boom, so I'm kind of hesitant to say one way or the other. I think they're probably worth a visit for sure, but maybe Ninnaji is one that would be a little bit lesser known because people are going up there for the Golden Pavilion and the Rock Garden at Ryoanji, and then not seeing Ninnaji, which is just one more kind of stop beyond that. And those are my thoughts for Kyoto. If you like these little random tourist recommendations, let me know, and I'll see if I can maybe throw something in there every month, just random. I've been to a lot of other random places all across Japan, and I could probably throw in maybe one or two little nuggets here and there on podcasts if that's something people are interested in. But yeah, go ahead and check out the newsletter. I've got more on Reibun there, on that phrase moro moro. Check out the blog, but I basically kind of read off the blog here on the podcast, so there's not too much in addition there. But yep, I hope you guys have a great month. Enjoy this very reasonable weather here in Osaka, but hints of bad weather to come this summer. So and get out there, enjoy it while you can, touch some grass, and we'll see you next month.